Imagine sitting in a courtroom, hoping for justice, only to be met with the cruelest disrespect. That's exactly what happened to one black woman when a judge, who was supposed to uphold the law, crossed the line in a shocking display of arrogance and bias. What started as a routine court case quickly escalated into something unimaginable as the judge, in a shocking moment of hubris, insulted her in front of everyone. But just when it seemed like the injustice would go unchecked, something extraordinary happened. Minutes after the heated exchange, the very judge who thought he was untouchable found himself in handcuffs. But how did it all unfold? Was this just a moment of poor judgment, or was there something deeper at play? Stay with me as we unravel the shocking turn of events that no one saw coming. What led to this unexpected twist? And what does it say about the fragile balance of power in the courtroom? You won't believe what happens next. Keep watching to find out what happened to this corrupt judge and the brave woman who stood up for herself. To understand what led to this shocking moment, we need to take a step back and look at the judge in question. Judge Thomas O'Connor had been in the legal system for over 2 decades, known for his tough, no-nonsense approach to cases. But as the years passed, whispers of bias and misconduct followed him. Many claimed that his judgments were often harsh, particularly towards people of color. Still, no one had ever dared to challenge his authority until now. On that day, the woman at the center of it all, Aisha Thompson, was just trying to get through a simple hearing. She had been wronged in a business deal, and all she wanted was a fair hearing. But when the judge began to belittle her, making snide remarks about her background and even her appearance, something in Aisha snapped. She wasn't about to let him get away with it. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, but no one could have predicted what happened next. As Aisha stood her ground, refusing to back down, the courtroom fell into an eerie silence. Was she about to get the justice she deserved, or would the system's flaws win again? The unexpected turn was about to unfold, and no one knew how far this would go. As Aisha stood there, her hands trembling but her voice unwavering, the room seemed to hold its breath. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting against a system that had, for so long, dismissed people like her. The judge's words stung, not just because they were insulting, but because they exposed something much darker. The inherent prejudice that some believed still lingered in the corridors of power. Aisha wasn't just confronting Judge O'Connor's cruelty. She was confronting the entire system of justice that had failed so many before her. The courtroom was divided. Some of the onlookers, mostly regular citizens who had come for other hearings, quietly murmured their disapproval, but others, seated at the back, exchanged knowing goal. Judge O'Connor leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from arrogance to irritation. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone like Aisha. His gavel came down hard, the sharp crack echoing through the courtroom. "Watch your tone," he warned, his voice laced with condescension. But Aisha wasn't backing down. "I deserve to be treated with respect," she shot back, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The air in the room thickened with tension. The murmurs in the audience grew louder. Some people whispered in shock at Aisha's boldness, while others nodded in silent support. Even the court clerk seemed uneasy, shifting nervously in his seat. Something about the judge's reaction didn't sit right with those watching. Then, almost as if he wanted to prove a point, Judge O'Connor made a mistake, one that would cost him everything. He let his temper slip. He went too far. His words, sharp and cutting, revealed something ugly beneath the surface. Gasps rippled through the room. But before the judge could regain control, movement at the back of the courtroom caught everyone's attention. A pair of officers had stepped inside, and they weren't there for Aisha. Judge O'Connor's eyes flicked toward the officers, his usual confidence wavering for the first time. The courtroom was dead silent. Aisha could feel the shift in the air. Something much bigger was happening, something no one had expected. The officers moved with purpose, their expressions unreadable. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice sharp, but not as steady as before. One of the officers, a tall man with a badge glinting under the fluorescent lights, stepped forward. "Judge O'Connor, we need to speak with you." Now, his tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. The judge let out a dry laugh, shaking his head, as if this was some kind of misunderstanding. "In the middle of my court," he scoffed. "This is outrageous." But no one was laughing. The energy in the room had completely shifted. Ayesha's heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold. She had come to fight for her own justice, but now it seemed like justice had been coming for the judge all along. The officers exchanged a glance, then one of them pulled something from his pocket, a document. The moment the judge saw it, his face went pale. The entire courtroom leaned in, waiting for what would happen next. The moment the document was unfolded, the room fell into a hushed silence. The officer's voice broke the tension. "Judge Thomas O'Connor, you are being arrested under suspicion of judicial misconduct and corruption. We have evidence of multiple unethical rulings in your courtroom, as well as bribery from defendants you favored in exchange for leniency." Ayesha's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just about her case anymore. It was about something far bigger, something that could bring the corrupt judge down once and for all. Judge O'Connor's face twisted in shock, disbelief flashing across his features. "This is absurd," he stammered, standing up and backing away. But the officers were already moving in, swiftly placing his hands behind his back. The once mighty judge, who had ruled with such authority, was now reduced to a man desperately trying to hold onto his power. "I demand a lawyer," he shouted, his voice trembling. But then, just as the handcuffs clicked into place, the final twist came. Ayesha, her voice barely above a whisper, spoke up. "You're not the only one with power here." Her words hung in the air, powerful and defiant. The officers stopped for a moment, glancing at her in confusion. Ayesha reached into her bag and pulled out a phone, revealing a video recording. The video was proof of Judge O'Connor's shady dealings, texts, meetings, and phone calls. The moment he had thought was his victory had now become his undoing. As the officers led him out of the courtroom, the crowd erupted in disbelief and relief. Ayesha had not only stood up for herself, but had inadvertently exposed the judge's entire corrupt network. And yet, as the doors slammed shut behind O'Connor, another thought crossed Ayesha's mind. This battle may have been won, but the war against systemic corruption was far from over. What other corrupt officials were still out there, and who else was going to fight for the truth? The story didn't end here. It had only just begun. As the courtroom settled into a stunned silence, Ayesha's heart still raced, the weight of what had just unfolded slowly sinking in. The judge, the man who had held the power over her case and so many others, was now being led away in handcuffs. The feeling of victory was surreal, almost too heavy to grasp in the moment. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, had taken down a corrupt figure who had been abusing his position for years. The courtroom erupted in whispers and murmurs, a mix of shock, disbelief, and for some, a quiet sense of relief. Ayesha's eyes scanned the crowd, catching the gaze of a few familiar faces, people who had seen what she had been through, people who understood the cost of fighting back against an unfair system. Her attorney, who had been silent throughout the entire ordeal, now stood up and gave her an approving nod. It wasn't just her win, it was their win. But as she stepped out of the courtroom, into the crisp air of the outside world, a new realization washed over her. She had exposed O'Connor, yes, but that didn't mean the fight was over. The system was still flawed, still broken. As the media began to swarm the courthouse, capturing the story, the next steps for Ayesha weren't clear. She wasn't just a woman fighting for justice in her own case anymore. She was now part of something bigger, the fight against systemic corruption, against the abuse of power that had existed far too long in the shadows. Ayesha knew her life was about to change. She would likely face backlash, perhaps even threats from those who had supported the judge and his corrupt network. But as she looked at the reporters gathering around, eager to interview her, she realized she had a responsibility to continue speaking out. Her bravery had ignited something in others. Stories of other victims began to surface, people who had been affected by the same corrupt system Aisha had fought against. The more people came forward, the more powerful their collective voice became. In the weeks that followed, Aisha became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you, one person can make a difference. Her actions sparked investigations into other judges, lawyers, and public officials who had been playing the system for their own gain. News outlets covered the case extensively, and though O'Connor was just one man, his downfall set off a chain reaction that changed the course of countless lives. For Aisha, there were no immediate celebrations. Instead, she took time to reflect on what had happened and what was yet to come. She spent time with her family, grounding herself in the love and support of those closest to her. But she also knew she couldn't rest. There were still battles to fight, injustices to uncover, and voices to amplify. The fight was far from over. As the story of Judge O'Connor's arrest faded from the headlines, the fight for justice continued to simmer beneath the surface. Aisha, now more determined than ever, began working alongside advocacy groups and legal teams to push for real reform. She knew that the legal system wasn't perfect, but she also knew that it could be changed. The truth, once revealed, could not be hidden again. And Aisha had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the fight for justice was not just standing up, but speaking out. In the end, her story wasn't just about one woman taking down a corrupt judge. It was about the power of standing up for what's right, the courage to challenge a broken system, and the reminder that no one is untouchable, not even the ones who think they control it all.